Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. The other way. Let's watch.
About these stores, it's like playing pretend. I'm Debbie. I'm 6.
One of my favorite places to go in Seattle is exactly like this. I mean, it's not the same stuff that they're selling, but I believe that is a consignment store where each one of those little cubicle areas is another consignment seller. And there's a really great version of this in Seattle and South Seattle. It used to be called Pacific Galleries. Now it's called, I think, Lander or something. For my birthday sometimes, because like, okay, my wife, my family, I said, what do you want to do? I'll be like, I want to go to the antique mall in South Seattle. I just love it. It's just all these little things that you can get, ornaments, just, they don't make things always like they used to. The detail and the specific artistry of things of the past. And, it's hipsterism, I suppose, but also there can be vintage records. There can be just fun little, it's like a museum where you can buy things, is the way that I think about it. And everything's cheap, because it's all used, and there's hardly anyone ever in there in those places. And I can just spend literally hours just walking up and down the aisles. And yeah, so the little I know of Debbie so far, we are kindred spirits in that way.
Years old, and I live in Sugar Hill, Georgia. Look at the cats in the bag.
And another thing that I do is for some reason in my adult life, but more so recently, is I've been collecting porcelain cats. Actually, let me just go get some. So the first one that started this all off is a very creepy looking one that I liked a lot. I saw this at a vintage store downtown Seattle, Pioneer Square, that no longer exists. And I just thought, I don't know, it just sort of intrigued me. I always thought this one was kind of creepy though, in a lot of ways. And then fast forward to my trip to London, actually, with my wife, and I went to the Freud Museum where he lived in his later life after emigrating to London. It's his house, actually, that they converted into a museum, and it's really great. Highly recommend. And in the gift shop, which was, pretty small little gift shop, they sold these replicas on Freud's desk. He had all these artifacts, these archaeology artifacts, and there are all these little figurines, and he had a lot of them. He collected them. And one of the things that he had was, I think, an actual statuette from ancient Egypt, or a replica or something. And it looked like this like black cat, which I think is a god or something in ancient Egypt. And so I got it, and I always loved this, and it would fall and break. It did once, and then I glued it back together, or my wife glued it back together, and then it fell again. That time it was just so obliterated that I couldn't put it back together. So I looked online and I actually found one that is similar. It's not the same. It's actually a lot bigger than the original, so that's where that one came from. I'm pretty sure this one's from Mexico, Puerto Vallarta area. Beads that you put on meticulously. I think this one's from Colombia, actually, from Bogota. I'm not sure. I think this one's from Havana, Cuba. Handmade. Oh, no. This one is actually from Salmon Days in Issaquah, which is nearby Seattle, which is where I grew up. I always went to Salmon Days, if you're familiar. This one is from Havana, Cuba. Handmade. I actually bought it from, or wait, is that where? I should write a note on all these. Is this one also from Mexico? It's kind of dusty. I don't know. I always forget. I think I might have bought this one at that art antique place. I do know where I bought this one, though, because I just bought it last week. This is from a drugstore, a quaint little drugstore that I liked the energy of in Kenmore, Washington, which is just north of Seattle. It's just a little cat. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, so that's just a sampling of the cats. I also like to lean into the whole crazy cat lady thing, because I think that the stereotype is stupid, so I'm trying to own it, right? It's sort of like when people used to call people gay as a way of trying to put them down. It's eventually gay people are just like, okay, fine, but we're going to own it and we're going to celebrate it. So I would be accused of that sometimes, like, oh, you're like a crazy cat lady. I'd be like, what's wrong with that? So you don't have a heart? You don't like cats? What's wrong with you? I feel bad for you that you don't like cats. How sad for you. Yes, I'm a crazy cat lady,
It never lets me down. The red-winged blackbird is something that's close to me. As a child, I always wished I could be that bird to go away, fly away and not come back. Growing up, my mother had some significant mental health issues.
Okay, that's what I thought she was referring to. So she said as a kid, she always wanted to be a bird and fly away. Isn't that from Forrest Gump? And then she also says that her mom had significant mental health issues. It's hard to know what that means. If I was to take a guess, I would say that she had a lot of maybe mood swings and was abusive. I don't know. Could be drug abuse in there too. I don't know. Could be anything. But at the very least, she is saying that her childhood was really rough, which is sad.
I never knew any kind of normalcy or structure. And as I got older, I never knew what a healthy relationship should look like.
Okay, so she's identifying that she didn't have a good model for a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage. And that might have affected her, I'm guessing, and might have caused her to not know when she was in a bad relationship or to seek out the wrong kind of people, or I don't know. Let's see what she says.
I was very, very naive. So I was very trusting. I've been married twice.
So there is a condition, and I don't know, total speculation. Well, I'll just use it as a jumping off point, that when you neglect children, when you don't attune properly to children, when you mistreat them and you don't give them enough love and attention, then for some of those kids, not all of them, they will develop an attachment disorder early in their childhood that is diagnosable, or they're on the spectrum, in which they do not discriminate between attachment figures. All of you with kids know that when your kids reach a certain age, like 6 months old-ish and beyond, they will definitely know the difference between you, their caregivers, their parents, and other people. And they will prefer you to other people, particularly strangers, to the extent that they'll be terrified of strangers, usually. Not always. Some kids are a little bit more open, but there's definitely a preference for the caregiver. Children evolved that way. Humans evolved to have that instinct for obvious reasons, in all likelihood. It's basically similar to like imprinting on other animals. When you have, I can't remember the species, is it geese or something? If you just happen to be at the right time when the little goose is developing, they will imprint on you and follow you around everywhere and consider you to be their parent, even though you're a different species, you're a human. So the same goes for us. We have a different way of imprinting, so to speak, but we will definitely attach ourselves to the caregivers that were there at a certain time in our life, and we will not want to be with other people. For kids that are significantly abused, mistreated, or neglected, they actually don't have anyone to imprint on because there's no difference between strangers and the caregivers, really. So what they do is they basically forego the imprinting phase, and they basically just think of everyone as their caregivers, and they will indiscriminately attach themselves temporarily even with anyone that will pay attention to them, and they don't differentiate between their caregivers and strangers. So they will walk up to strangers and hold their hand and say, "How are you doing?" and take me home with you. Or when an extended relative comes over once every 6 months, they will rejoice and sit in their lap and say, like, "You're my favorite." It depends, but the marker is that they don't prefer the caregivers over other people, and it's clear. And they're not afraid of strangers. And so I don't know if that's what we're hearing from her. And sometimes when that doesn't resolve, when it's not healed and provided with enough corrective experience or therapy, then that will morph through the stages of life into an adult or a young adult or a teenager who will hand over their trust and their life to anyone because they don't have the ability to discriminate between people who are to be trusted, because usually in a healthy situation, we understand that we don't hand over our life and our trust and all of our things to people that we don't know that well. But then once we get to know them, then we start to trust them. Whereas people with this condition, they don't have that gauge. They don't understand that. They don't work in that world. And they have all the normal needs to attach, but they don't ramp up to it. They just hand everything over. And so she's saying that she was very naive. It kind of sounds like that's what she's saying. Let's rewind that.
Or structure. And as I got older, I never knew what a healthy relationship should look like. I was very, very naive. So I was very trusting.
Again, I can't tell from what she's saying, but it would be an hypothesis if I were to hear that from a client, what I was saying earlier. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about this, you can, this condition that I'm describing, in the old language, we used to call it reactive attachment disorder disinhibited type, I believe. But now in the DSM-5, we call it disinhibited social engagement disorder.
I've been married twice. I was married to my first husband for 4 years, and we had a son named Julian. My husband was basically a womanizer, and he would drink a lot, and so I left and never looked back.
Okay, hard to tell. And by the way, those diagnoses, the attachment disorder diagnoses, are only for children. We don't diagnose adults with them, but we do understand that those disorders don't just go away as the child ages into teenage years and adulthood. So it will morph into other kinds of conditions that we will talk about, but I won't go into it.
Love doesn't come in that nice, neat little package that we thought so as little girls, you know. We thought, oh, our Prince Charming's coming. Well, they don't teach you that, you know, sometimes it's the big bad wolf.
So there's a very playful youthfulness to her when she talks. I think she might even identify that way, that she likes the magic of life and she likes to have fun. She likes to use words that are, I don't know how to say it, but more youthful. You know, she doesn't come across like a professional person who is extremely competent in the adult world. I don't think she's incompetent, but there's a playfulness to her, right? And it's possible, I don't know, but children who are neglected, mistreated early in life can sometimes, at some point in their adult life, return to those years as a way of trying to get them back because they weren't allowed them when they were young. They weren't given attention, and so they, throughout their adult life, will seek attention from a place of childishness. It's not pathological. There's nothing wrong with it. People do this all the time. We regress all the time. I mean, for me, it's comforting for me to return to things from my childhood. Music, I find myself more and more listening to music from the 70s because that's the music I heard when I was a child, and I find it to be the best era of music. I think objectively it might be, but of course that's subjective. Other just little knickknacks or certain kinds of art or kitchenware that reminds me of childhood or something, you know. So like, I'll never forget, I had these vintage glasses that were clearly trying to evoke the 70s, you know, that sort of beige colored glass. A friend of mine came over and she's older. She would, you know, she's 10, 20 years older. And she looked at the glasses and she's like, those are some ancient glasses. And I'd be like, yeah, I love them. You know, don't they really just feel like the 70s? And she said, why would you want things to look like the 70s? That's disgusting. Because to her, it was a different association, you know, but to me, and not everyone has that. But my point is that for her, it's possible that she's trying to repair. She's trying to heal from what she went through by allowing herself to have the indulgences of a child.
And then everything started going south. He started traveling more than normal for work, so I started to get suspicious. I hired a private detective, and they showed me photos of him with another woman in another country. It was such a gut-wrenching time in my life.
Yeah, I mean, that's rough regardless of the circumstances other than that, right? To be cheated on by who you think is your soulmate, your lifelong partner. And she hired a private investigator, which is interesting, but it was justified because they found something. Another detail here, and I can never tell because people have very rich stories, and we all understand that the very little we hear about their story on this show is, about a fraction of a percent of the full story of these individuals' full lives. But she gives the detail that she was cheated on. It was devastating, and it's possible that for her, for the very first time, this husband of hers was the very first stable relationship she'd ever had. Her childhood was very rough, and then her first partner was very brief, and then she gets married for 20-something years. You'd think for her, she'd be like, well, this is the best relationship I've ever been in. And then to be blindsided like that would be a big blow. It would feel like, what's the point in living at that point? It can feel pretty demoralizing. And then the detail that she was cheated on by her husband with a woman from another country is interesting, because does that plant a seed that she's like, well, if you're going to do it, I'm going to do it? I don't know. And then that leads down a road of dating people from other countries. Again, I don't know.
Skeleton, we don't know what can happen to us. And, and I wanted to capture that. For 12 years, I sat behind closed doors. I swore off men until I met Oussama.
Cuckoo Papa. Cuckoo Papa.
He's from Morocco.
So sometimes I do wonder about the circumstances that predated the meeting of the person from the other country, because on its face, and often as presented on the show, the amount of rapid engagement and getting married is notable, is different than the average. Most people, they date people for a while, maybe a year or two at the very least, before they get engaged and married, sometimes a lot longer, right? And on this show, they seem to be just rapidly moving through. Now, they'll say, well, no, we've known each other for a really long time. But, usually in person, they only know each other for a very brief time. So I'm often wondering, like, what happened to these individuals that led up to that decision? Because I'm guessing that there are a lot of people in the world who actually know many people in the world who will date people from other countries, but they take it slow. They don't move as fast as these people do. So yeah, I'm guessing that this show, actually, the producers actually select people that are moving very quickly, because if they found a couple that had taken it more slowly, there's a greater chance that there's no drama, right? But when people barely know each other, the chances of something happening skyrockets, right? In terms of drama and breaking up and hurting each other's feelings, blah, blah, blah. So we're hearing from her that she was devastated by being cheated on, and then for something like over 10 years, she just swore off dating entirely and was probably recovering emotionally. And then she emerges by going online and flirting with someone in another country, Oussama. And you could imagine that, like, I think Ed actually suffered from this as well, that the arrested development aspect to this, when people are abused, when people go for a long time without dating, there is a tendency I've seen in people where they will basically kind of reset the clock regarding their wisdom in dating and their decision-making skills, and also the amount of elation, because when you first fall in love, not everyone, but I think for a lot of people, when you first fall in love at 13 or 15 or 19, the amount of feeling that you have and the intensity of it is so great that if you had a chance, you would hand over everything and you would give up everything for that relationship, even though it's literally like 6 days long, right? That's normal. For 13-year-olds to do that, that's normal. The issue is that 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds, they don't have the power to ruin their lives. I mean, they have some power to ruin their lives, but they can't hand over their checking accounts usually, hopefully. They can't get married at that age, right? In most jurisdictions. And so they have to wait. And by the time they do have the power, when they're 18 or whatever, then they will have wizened up a little bit, and they don't make those mistakes. But if you are an adult and you're thinking and feeling like a younger person, then you might just rush into things because it feels natural, and the amount of love and dopamine and serotonin or whatever that's pumping through your veins, and lust, I suppose, just completely overpowers your prefrontal cortex. So I think that might be a speculation with her. But I don't know, maybe this is a very wise relationship. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself, really, because you deserve it. You really, really do.